The afternoon sunlight rested softly on the houses in the neighborhood, warming the fences, the sidewalks, and the grassy yards where children usually played. On this day, the air felt peaceful, almost too quiet, except for the occasional passing car or bird singing on a branch. In the middle of this calm scene, a small boy named Leo was running around his backyard with the kind of energy only a young child could have. He had a bright red toy truck in his hands, and every few steps, he would make loud engine noises. Pretending he was driving it through imaginary mountains and muddy roads, Leo didn't think he was being loud. To him, this was just what playing sounded like. His older sister, Mia, was inside the house sitting by the living room window, keeping an eye on him like their father had asked. Their dad had left for work a few hours earlier, and he trusted Mia to watch her little brother until he returned. She was responsible and usually didn't mind. Leo was playful, but he wasn't difficult to handle. Most days, he simply needed space to run, laugh, and use up his energy, but not everyone in the neighborhood understood children the same way. One house over lived a woman named Ms. Turner. She had moved into the area only a month earlier. She kept mostly to herself, rarely spoke to anyone, and often peeked through her blinds, as if watching the world with constant suspicion. Before this neighborhood, she had lived in a busy apartment building where noise was a problem every day. Maybe that was why even the smallest sound now made her feel unsettled. That afternoon, as Leo zoomed his toy truck over the steps and across the concrete, he suddenly dropped it. The truck hit the patio with a loud clatter that echoed through the quiet surroundings. The noise startled a bird from a nearby fence and made Leo jump for a moment before he burst into a giggle. He picked the truck up again and continued playing, but inside her home, Miss Turner froze. She had been sitting by her kitchen table, sipping tea, when the sound startled her. To her ear, it didn't sound like a toy hitting the ground. It sounded heavier, more troubling. She stood up slowly, staring out her window with narrowed eyes. She saw Leo in the yard, but from her angle, she couldn't see the truck in his hands. She only saw him clutching something and bending over. She also saw that the father wasn't home. She didn't recognize Mia's figure through the window either, since Mia hadn't moved from her seat. Miss Turner's thoughts began to fill with assumptions, each one more dramatic than the last. She believed something bad might be happening. She believed the child was in trouble. She believed that if she didn't act immediately, something worse could happen. Her heart raced, even though the yard next door was calm and the child was smiling. Instead of stepping outside and checking, instead of calling out to the kids, instead of simply watching for a few more moments, she rushed to her phone. Her fingers shook as she dialed. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I hear a child screaming next door. Something isn't right. Please come quickly. She was convinced she was helping. She didn't consider that she hadn't actually heard a scream. She didn't think about the toy that might have caused the noise. She didn't think to look closer or ask anyone else if they heard anything. All she knew was that she felt disturbed, and she reacted. Outside, Leo continued playing. He switched from driving his toy truck to making it race along the wooden fence, dragging it so it made a rattling sound. Mia knocked on the window and signaled for him to be gentle, and he nodded, slowing down a bit. He always listened to her. She was the one who read him stories, helped him do puzzles, and made him laugh when their father was too tired from work. Mia didn't think anything unusual was happening. She had spent many afternoons like this, watching over Leo, keeping him entertained until their dad finished his shift. She thought the day would pass just like all the others. She had no idea what was coming. A few blocks away, 2 officers in a patrol car received the emergency call. The report said possible child distress. The kind of call no officer ever ignored. They turned on their lights and headed toward the street, where the small boy played without a worry in the world. Minutes later, the sound of sirens echoed down the road. Neighbors lifted their heads, wondering what was going on. A couple walking their dog paused at the sidewalk. A man mowing his lawn shut off his machine and looked around. Leo, busy with his truck, didn't even hear it at first. But Mia did. Her head snapped up. She stood from the couch and walked quickly toward the front window. Her eyebrows pulled together with confusion. Why were the police here? She stepped outside onto the front porch, shielding her eyes from the bright sun as the patrol car pulled up right in front of their home. Leo finally noticed the flashing lights and stopped running. His toy truck slipped from his hand and fell to the ground, its wheels spinning quietly. 2 officers stepped out of the car. One looked around the yard. The other glanced at Mia, double quotes, "Hi, sweetheart," one officer said gently. "Are your parents home?" Mia blinked, unsure what to say. "My dad's at work. It's just me and my brother." The officer nodded slowly, exchanging a quick look with his partner. "We got a call from someone who was concerned about something happening here," he explained. "Can we talk to you for a moment?" Mia's stomach tightened. She wasn't doing anything wrong. Leo wasn't doing anything wrong. Why were they talking like something bad had happened? Before she could respond, Ms. Turner stepped out of her house. She walked briskly toward the officers, her expression a mix of fear and pride. "I'm the one who called," she announced. "I heard a loud noise and a child in distress. I believe something unsafe is happening." Mia's eyes widened. She stared at the woman, completely confused. Leo didn't look distressed at all. He was standing quietly, staring at the officers with big, curious eyes. "Distress?" Mia said softly. "He's just playing." Miss Turner shook her head quickly. "No, I heard something. A heavy thud. Crying. Something isn't right." The officers now looked unsure. They had to take every report seriously, even if it seemed exaggerated. "Do you mind if we take a quick look inside?" the taller officer asked kindly. Mia felt her face grow warm. People were watching from their yards now. 2 teenagers on bikes rolled slowly to a stop at the edge of the driveway. A woman watering her plants paused, letting the hose drip onto the grass. Mia hated this attention. She hated how Miss Turner was staring at her with suspicion, instead of simply asking what happened. She hated that Leo was watching everything, confused and suddenly nervous, but she also knew she had nothing to hide. She nodded quietly. "Okay, you can look." Miss Turner folded her arms like she had successfully solved a mystery, like she had rescued a child from danger. She didn't notice the hurt forming in Mia's eyes, or the fear creeping into Leo's expression. The officers walked toward the house, stepping carefully through the doorway. They looked around the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway. Everything was clean. Everything was normal. There were no signs of trouble, no signs of harm, no signs of anything except a family living their everyday life. Meanwhile, Mia stood outside with Leo, keeping a hand on his shoulder. She didn't want him to worry, but she could feel him shaking a little. He didn't understand why the police were here. Mia didn't fully understand either. Inside, the officers continued their quick look-through, trying to assess whether there was any reason to be concerned. They found none, but they still had to follow procedure. Outside, Ms. Turner hovered nearby, glancing between the children and the house, waiting for someone to praise her, waiting for someone to say she had done the right thing. Mia wanted to speak up, to tell her that everything was fine and she should have just asked, but she was too overwhelmed, too embarrassed. The patrol car lights reflected off the windows, painting the yard with flashes of red and blue. Leo leaned closer to his sister, holding onto her shirt. Across the street, a man whispered to his wife. Another neighbor lifted his phone, recording the scene from a distance. The rumor that something serious was happening was already starting to spread. All because of a misunderstanding, all because someone jumped to conclusions, instead of pausing to observe, all because a toy truck fell on the ground. And Mia knew this moment, this scene would only get harder once their father came home and saw what was happening. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was only the beginning of the long, confusing chain of events that would unfold, all starting with one loud noise, one frightened neighbor, and one call that would change the day entirely. The officer stepped inside the house, moving slowly as they checked each room. They weren't looking for trouble. They were just following the rules they had to follow. Every time they were called about a child's safety, they had to be careful. Even if things looked normal, they had to be sure. Mia watched them from the doorway, her hands lightly resting on Leo's shoulders as he leaned into her side. She didn't like strangers walking through her home, but she didn't want to make things worse by saying the wrong thing. Outside, the patrol car lights continued to flash. People on the street kept staring. They whispered to each other, making guesses about what might be happening. Some thought the kids were in danger. Some thought the father had done something wrong. No one asked questions. They just assumed the same way Ms. Turner had. Leo looked up at his sister with wide eyes. "Are we in trouble?" he whispered. Mia shook her head quickly. "No, not at all. You didn't do anything. Just stay close to me." She tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. After a few minutes, one of the officers came back outside. His expression was calm, not tense or worried. "Everything looks fine so far," he said. "We just have to finish checking the rest of the house. It won't take long." Mia nodded, but before she could speak, Miss Turner stepped forward with a dramatic sigh. "Are you sure?" she asked the officer. "I told you I heard something very alarming. I don't think you've checked enough." The officer looked at her politely but firmly. "Ma'am, we're doing what we need to do. Please let us handle it." Miss Turner crossed her arms and stepped back, though her expression made it clear she wasn't satisfied. She still believed she was right. Even though nothing she had imagined was actually happening, a moment later the second officer came outside. "The house is fine," he said quietly to his partner. "Everything's clean. Nothing out of place. No signs of anything concerning." But procedure required more than a quick look. They still needed to ask a few questions. The taller officer approached Mia. "Can you tell me what you and your brother were doing this afternoon?" he asked gently. Mia swallowed hard. She didn't want to sound defensive. "He was playing outside with his toy truck. I was watching him from inside. He dropped it once. It made a loud noise. But he's okay. He wasn't hurt." "No one was yelling," Leo nodded quickly, wanting to back up his sister. "I was just playing," he said softly. Miss Turner shook her head from where she stood. "That isn't what I heard." Officers turned to her again. "Ma'am," the shorter officer said calmly, "we appreciate you calling if you thought something was wrong, but we have checked everything, and these children appear safe." She opened her mouth to argue again, but the officer lifted a hand politely. "We still need to wait for their father to come home. It's routine. Once we speak with him, we'll be able to close this call." Mia's heart dropped. Her father had no idea any of this was happening. He would be scared the moment he saw police cars outside the house. And he would definitely be confused. Wondering who called them and why, she pulled out her phone and dialed his number with shaky hands. He answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" he asked. His voice sounded tired but warm. Mia took a breath. "Dad, you need to come home. The police are here." There was a long silence. "What? Why?" "It's not us," she said quickly. "The neighbor called. She thought something was wrong, but we're fine. They're just waiting for you." Her father didn't say anything for a few seconds. She could hear background noise, the hum of machines, people talking, the busy sounds of his workplace. Then he spoke again. "I'm coming. Don't worry. I'll be there as fast as I can." When she hung up, Mia let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She glanced at the officers, then at the small crowd watching from the sidewalk. She hated all of it. She hated being the center of attention like this. Meanwhile, Ms. Turner stood with her chin raised, acting as if she had done something noble. She couldn't see how uncomfortable she had made the children. She couldn't see the stress on Mia's face or the nervous fidgeting in Leo's hands. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The officers stayed outside with Mia and Leo, asking simple questions just to keep them calm. The neighbors slowly trickled back into their homes, though a few kept peeking through windows or standing by their mailboxes, pretending to check their letters. Finally, a silver car turned into the driveway a little too fast. The brakes squeaked, and the door flew open. Their father stepped out, looking worried and confused. He walked straight to his kids, dropping down to eye level. "Are you both okay?" he asked. His voice was low and gentle, but he was clearly shaken. Mia nodded quickly. "We're fine. Nothing happened." Leo wrapped his arms around his father's leg. "I was just playing," he mumbled. Their father exhaled a long breath of relief before standing and turning toward the officers. "Can someone please explain what's going on?" The taller officer nodded. "We got a call from your neighbor saying she heard what sounded like a child in distress. We're required to check in these cases." The father's brows pulled together. "A child in distress? That's not possible. They were just playing." Before he could say anything else, Ms. Turner walked toward him quickly, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "I heard a loud bang," she announced, "and I heard crying. I had no choice but to call. I was trying to protect your children." The father stared at her for a moment, trying to stay calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step toward her, but he did stand a little straighter. "My daughter was watching her brother," he said steadily. "No one was hurt. No one was crying. It was just a toy." Miss Turner lifted her chin. "Well, I wasn't sure, and I'd rather be safe than sorry." The father nodded slowly, the way someone does when they're trying not to say something harsh. "I understand wanting to help," he said, "but you frightened my kids. You should have checked first. You could have asked. We've never had a problem here." For the first time, Ms. Turner's confidence faded just a little. She glanced at Leo, who was still holding onto his father's pants leg. She saw his nervous expression, his small hands gripping tightly. Something about that made her shift her weight, sure of herself. The officers continued the conversation, asking the father a few basic questions to finish their report. He answered them calmly, though anyone could see how stressed he was. He kept one hand resting on Leo's shoulder, grounding him, making sure he felt safe. After a few more minutes, the officers stepped aside to talk privately while filling out some last details. During this short break, the father bent down toward Mia. "You did the right thing letting them check the house," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." She nodded, though her eyes were still worried. "Everyone was watching," she whispered. "It felt like we did something bad even though we didn't." He gently squeezed her shoulder. "You didn't. This is just misunderstandings. People sometimes assume the worst before they understand what's actually happening." As if hearing that, Ms. Turner's face tightened slightly. She looked away, pretending to examine her mailbox even though she wasn't checking anything. When the officers finished their work, they approached the father once more. "Everything's fine," one of them said. "We're sorry for the inconvenience. We just had to make sure." The father nodded. "I understand. You're doing your job." The officers prepared to leave, and Mia felt another wave of relief washing over her. She hoped the flashing lights would disappear soon. She hoped the neighbors would stop staring. She hoped things would go back to normal. But as the patrol car doors closed and the engine started, there was still one more thing lingering in the air: a quiet tension. A feeling that someone had gone too far. A feeling that the day had been turned upside down for no real reason. The father took Leo's hand and gave me a small, reassuring smile. "Let's go inside," he said softly. As they started toward the house, Ms. Turner stepped forward again. She hesitated, her voice quieter than before. "I really thought something was wrong," she said. The father paused. He looked at her, and though his expression wasn't angry, it wasn't warm either. "I know you did," he said. "But next time, please check first. Ask, look, don't assume the worst." My kids were terrified today. Ms. Turner's shoulders sank slightly. She didn't answer right away. For the first time, she truly saw what her call had caused. The fear, the confusion, the embarrassment. She stepped back slowly as the family went inside. Closing the door behind them, inside the house, the quiet returned. No sirens, no voices. No strangers walking through rooms. Just the soft sound of the air conditioner and the small, shaky breaths of two kids trying to calm down. Mia sat on the couch while Leo curled beside her. Their father stood in the middle of the room, looking around almost as if he was checking again to make sure everything was truly okay. He finally sank into a chair, rubbing his forehead. "What a day," he murmured. Mia didn't say anything. She leaned her head against Leo's, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. They were safe. Nothing bad had happened, but the day wasn't over yet. Tomorrow, the neighbors would still talk. The rumor would still linger, and Ms. Turner would still have to face the weight of what she had started. For now. Though the family sat together in the calm silence of their home, trying to breathe again after a long, confusing afternoon, the next morning arrived with a strange heaviness. Even though the sunlight poured gently through the curtains and the street outside looked peaceful, birds hopped along the fence, the mail truck rolled slowly down the block, and a few neighbors watered their plants as if nothing unusual had happened the day before. But inside the small house, things felt different. The father woke early, long before Leo or Mia even stirred. He sat at the kitchen table with a warm cup of tea, staring at the surface as if the swirl of rising steam might offer answers. His eyes were tired. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed them, he imagined the flashing lights, the neighbors staring, his children's worried faces. He knew the officers were only doing their job. He didn't blame them for that. But the situation shouldn't have happened in the first place. One mistake, one assumption. One overreaction had shaken his family. He took a slow sip of his tea and sighed. A moment later, soft footsteps padded into the kitchen. Mia appeared, rubbing her eyes. She looked small, like the events of yesterday had shrunk her confidence. "Morning, Dad," she said quietly. He offered a gentle smile. "Morning. You hungry?" She shrugged, sliding into the chair across from him. "A little." There was a pause, long enough for both of them to avoid the one topic sitting quietly between them. "You okay?" he finally asked. She hesitated. "Kind of." Then, after a moment, "Do you think people are going to talk about us today?" He exhaled slowly. "Maybe people talk. But that doesn't mean what they say matters." She nodded, even though she didn't seem convinced. Before she could respond again, small footsteps raced across the hallway. Leo came charging into the kitchen with his usual morning energy. But the moment he saw his father and sister sitting quietly, his excitement dimmed. "Are we in trouble?" he asked seriously. Both his father and Mia rushed to respond. "No," they said at the same time. Leo relaxed slightly. Climbing into the seat next to his sister, "I didn't like the police coming," he whispered. His father leaned forward. "I know, but nothing was your fault. You were just playing. You didn't do anything wrong." Leo nodded, though the memory still sat in his eyes. The father ruffled his hair. "Come on, let's have breakfast. We'll get through today one step at a time." While they ate, the house slowly filled with a familiar rhythm again. Plates clinking, cereal crunching, Leo humming a random tune. The father tried to keep things light, talking about small things, what they might do on the weekend, whether they should plant new flowers in the yard. Mia listened quietly but responded when she could. By mid-morning, the family began their usual routines. The father needed to run a few errands. Mia had some school assignments to finish. Leo wanted to play, but he stayed closer to his sister than usual. When the father stepped outside to warm up the car, he noticed something that made him pause. Across the street, two neighbors were standing together, talking in low voices. As soon as they noticed him, they straightened up and pretended to look at their gardens. On the sidewalk, a jogger slowed down near the house, glancing at it with quiet curiosity before continuing down the street. The father sighed. He expected this. Word traveled fast in neighborhoods like theirs as he opened the car door. He heard another sound, the creak of a screen door next door. Ms. Turner stepped outside slowly, holding a mug of coffee. Her face was pale, and her eyes looked as if she hadn't slept either. For a moment, she stood frozen, unsure whether she should say something. The father didn't move toward her. He didn't glare at her. He simply waited. Finally, she walked a few steps closer. "About yesterday," she began, her voice quieter than he had ever heard it. He didn't answer immediately, letting her continue. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said. "I truly believed something was wrong. But after seeing your kids, after seeing how scared they were," she paused, swallowing hard, "I realize I may have acted too quickly." The father nodded slowly. "You did." She lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air, fragile and uncertain. He didn't rush to accept it. Instead, he took a moment to choose his words carefully. I understand wanting to help, he finally said. But when something doesn't look right, it's better to check. Ask. Look closely. A simple question could have avoided everything. She nodded again. I know, I panicked. I've had some bad experiences before. Noise scared me. I thought something serious was happening. He softened slightly at that. Everyone has a story, he said gently. But actions have consequences. My kids were terrified. They didn't deserve that. Her face tightened with guilt. I really am sorry, gave a short nod. Thank you for saying that. This wasn't a warm moment. It wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't anger either. It was simply honesty, Ms. Turner stepped back slowly and returned inside her house. The father stood there for a moment, letting the morning breeze settle his thoughts. Inside, Mia watched from the window. When her father came back in, she didn't ask what was said. She simply looked at him, reading his expression. She apologized, he said softly. Mia nodded. Do you believe her? He shrugged. I believe she felt something yesterday. And I believe she regrets how she acted. That's a start. Mia looked toward the neighbor's house again. Do you think she's going to call the police again? He shook his head. No. I think she learned her lesson. But whether the lesson would change anything in the long run, he didn't know. Later that afternoon, Mia went outside to sit on the porch. She brought a notebook with her she liked to draw when she was stressed. Leo followed her, carrying his toy truck. But he didn't run around the yard like he usually did. Are you scared to play? She asked him softly. Leo shrugged. What if she calls again? Mia pulled him closer. Dad talked to her. She won't. She paused. And even if she did, we didn't do anything wrong. So don't stop being you. Leo thought about that for a moment before sitting on the steps and rolling his truck back and forth quietly across the yard. The father watched them from inside the living room window. His heart ached, seeing his once carefree children suddenly careful, suddenly cautious. But he knew healing would take time. A little while later, a soft knock came at the front door. The father opened it to find a woman from down the street standing there. She held a small plate covered with foil. Hi, she said gently. I heard about what happened yesterday. Just wanted to check if you're all okay. She lifted the plate. I made something for you all. I thought it might cheer the kids up. The father blinked in surprise. He knew her only a little. They had waved at each other a few times, exchanged small talk at the mailbox, but they had never had a long conversation. Thank you, he said sincerely. That's very kind. She smiled softly. Kids should feel safe in their own home. I'm sorry. Things got out of hand. If you ever need anything, we're right down the street. He nodded gratefully. That means a lot. He brought the small plate inside, and Mia and Leo perked up when they saw cookies under the foil. Who gave us these? Leo asked. A neighbor, their father replied. A kind one. That moment, small as it was, helped erase a portion of the sting from yesterday as the day went on. More small moments like that slowly restored normalcy. Another neighbor waved warmly at Mia when she went to get the mail. A man from 2 houses down apologized for staring and said he never believed anything was wrong in the first place. A woman who had been watering her plants the previous day stopped by to ask if the family needed help with anything. Little gestures, small kindnesses, quiet reminders that not everyone assumed the worst. Even so, none of it erased the tension completely. In the late afternoon, a soft knock came from next door. It was Miss Turner again. Mia froze. Leo hid slightly behind his sister. The father stepped forward and opened the door. Ms. Turner looked nervous, holding a small envelope in her hands. I didn't know if you'd answer, she said quietly. We did, the father replied calmly. What do you need? She extended the envelope toward him. I wrote something, she said. I didn't want to disturb your family anymore, but I felt I needed to say it properly. He hesitated, then took the envelope. Thank you, he said. She nodded, stepping back. I won't bother you again. And she walked away. The father closed the door and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Simple, handwritten, A little shaky, it said, "I made a mistake. I let my past fears control me. I frightened your children, and I'm truly sorry. I will be more careful. I hope in time your family can feel safe near me again." The father read it twice before folding it gently. He didn't show it to Mia or Leo right away, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he wanted their fear to fade naturally, not from forced forgiveness. As evening settled, the house felt calmer. The children played a board game in the living room while their father cooked dinner. The scent of warm food filled the air, replacing yesterday's tension. Later, as they all sat together at the table, Mia looked up suddenly. "Dad? Is everything going to be normal again?" He paused, looking at both of his children. "I think things will get better," he said softly. "Not all at once." But little by little, Leo nodded thoughtfully. "Like fixing a broken toy?" The father smiled. "Yes, exactly like that." And as the night grew darker, and the family sat together under the warm glow of the kitchen light, a small sense of peace began to return. It wasn't perfect, and the story wasn't over, but healing had begun. The moment the officers stepped back and gave a small nod, the father felt something shift inside him. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't fear. It was more like a heavy mix of disbelief and sadness that all of this had even happened. He looked at his kids first, noticing how they clung to each other, unsure if things were finally calming down. The older one had her arms wrapped around her younger brother, as if she was still afraid someone might separate them. That sight alone made the father's heart ache. He knelt down beside them, touched their shoulders gently, and assured them everything was okay. He didn't raise his voice, didn't sound annoyed, and didn't let even a hint of frustration slip out. He simply spoke to them with calm, steady warmth. The boy's breathing slowed, and he leaned into his father's side. Sensing the safety he had been needing from the moment the police showed up, the girl nodded quietly, though her eyes still had questions in them, questions she wasn't ready to ask out loud yet. The officers stepped closer again, this time in a more relaxed manner, ready to talk through what they had learned. One of them sighed softly, as if he wanted to ease the tension a little before starting. He explained how they had spoken separately to each child and found no sign of any harm or neglect. Everything was consistent. The story matched perfectly on each side, and nothing suggested anything dangerous had happened. The loud sound that caused the neighbors' panic was simply a toy falling, and the boy had only shouted because he dropped it. On his foot for a second, the other officer looked toward the neighbor briefly, then back at the father. He explained that sometimes people misinterpret things, and while it's better to be cautious, it's also important not to assume the worst without checking. The father nodded politely, even though inside he was still working through the swirl of feelings that came from seeing police in front of his home, for no real reason. He thanked the officers for being respectful and understanding. Even though the situation had been embarrassing and stressful, the neighbor, who had been watching all of this unfold from a few steps away, stood with stiff shoulders and a face that didn't know which expression to hold. Her eyes kept darting between the officers, the father, and the kids. It was clear she wanted to say something, but she couldn't decide whether to stay defensive or to soften up. The officers turned to her. One of them gently reminded her that calling emergency services was serious and should be done only when she had clear, real evidence of danger, not just assumptions or misheard noises. The neighbor's posture changed slightly, her chin lowering just a bit, though she still tried to explain that she thought something terrible was happening. Her voice wasn't as confident as before. It trembled just enough to show that the pressure of being wrong, publicly wrong, was beginning to settle on her shoulders. She glanced at the dad, perhaps ready for him to lash out or blame her. But he didn't. He just looked at her with a calm expression that somehow made her even more uncomfortable. He didn't yell or lecture. Instead, he simply said that her choice to call the police without checking had frightened his children. He explained that kids remember events like this, and it had shaken them in ways she probably hadn't considered. His voice never rose, but the weight of his words was enough to make the neighbor swallow hard. She had thought she was doing something responsible, but now she was realizing how her quick decision had caused a storm she never intended. The officers continued talking, mostly to her now. They reminded her that jumping to conclusions could create dangerous misunderstandings and waste valuable time and resources. They weren't harsh, but they were firm, making sure she understood the seriousness of what she had done. She nodded slightly, trying to maintain some sort of dignity, though her face showed clearly that she wished the ground would open up and swallow her whole. The father thanked the officers again and walked them toward the front gate. As they prepared to leave, they exchanged a few final words, mostly polite reassurance. He thanked them once more for treating the situation carefully instead of assuming guilt. They stepped into their vehicle, took one last look at the situation, and then drove away. As the car disappeared down the street, the neighborhood seemed to exhale, as if everything had been holding its breath. When the father turned back toward the house, he saw several neighbors pretending not to look, even though they had been paying full attention the entire time. Some stood behind windows, some behind fences, some lingering on porches, even after the officers drove away. He could guess the whispers would start soon, the kind that float around quietly for weeks. But right now all he cared about was getting his children inside and making sure they felt safe again. He walked over to them, placed a hand on each of their backs, and guided them toward the door. Neither of them spoke as they stepped inside. It wasn't silence out of fear anymore, just the kind of silence that comes when a long, stressful moment finally ends. They needed time to let their minds settle, and he understood that. Once they were in the living room, he asked if they were hungry or if they wanted to sit with him for a while. Both of them gravitated toward him immediately, choosing to sit close instead of moving around the house on their own. He didn't ask unnecessary questions or force a conversation. He simply let them be there with him, giving them as much comfort as his presence alone could offer. Outside, the neighbor still hadn't moved from her spot. She stood there, staring at the father's front door, her thoughts clearly tangled. The rest of the neighborhood resumed their quiet routines, but she remained frozen, trying to process the fact that she had been wrong, completely wrong. Her intention had been to intervene in what she assumed was a terrible situation, but now she was realizing she had created one instead. Eventually, she walked back toward her own house, but her steps were slow and heavy. She kept looking over her shoulder as if unsure whether she should go knock on the door and apologize right away or wait. In the end, she decided to step inside her home first, overwhelmed by the embarrassment she felt. She closed her door behind her, leaned against it, and let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The reality of what she had done was sinking in. Meanwhile, inside the father's home, the kid sat with him for a long time, finally beginning to calm down enough to talk. The boy asked why the police came. The father explained gently, in a way the child could understand, that sometimes people get confused or afraid and make mistakes. The girl asked if they had done something wrong. He told her no, absolutely not, and reminded her that she did everything right by staying calm and answering the officers honestly. He reassured them that they were safe and that nothing like this was going to happen again. He made sure they understood that the house was still their safe place, no matter what happened outside. His steady voice made the room feel smaller, in a comforting way, like nothing else mattered in that moment. The evening passed quietly, filled with small actions that helped bring things back to normal. He made dinner for the kids, something simple that didn't require much focus, because his mind was still replaying the day's events. The kids stayed close to him, almost shadowing him as he moved around the kitchen. It wasn't clinginess. It was a search for reassurance. After dinner, they watched something light on the TV to shift their minds away from what had happened. The father kept glancing at them, checking if they were relaxing or still tense. Slowly, they loosened up, leaning back into the sofa cushions and letting out little sighs now and then as night settled in. And the kids finally went to bed. The father stepped outside for fresh air. He leaned on the railing of his porch, looked around the quiet street, and took a deep breath. The neighborhood looked peaceful again, almost as if nothing had happened earlier. But he knew things had changed. He could feel the difference in how he would look at certain people from now on, not with anger, but with a new understanding that not everyone reacts rationally under pressure. He noticed a soft movement across the street. The neighbor was peeking from behind her curtain. She quickly pulled it back when she realized he saw her. He wasn't surprised. He figured she was worried about what he thought of her now. He didn't feel hatred toward her, just disappointment, and hope that she had learned something important. He stood outside for a little longer before heading inside. When he finally shut the door behind him, he knew the day had been exhausting, but also revealing. The chaos had settled, the confusion had cleared, and the truth had finally come out. Now all that was left was what would happen next, whether the neighbor would step forward and admit she had been wrong, whether the neighborhood would move past the gossip, and how his kids would remember the day. But for now, he focused on one simple thing. The house was calm again, and his children were safe. That alone was enough to give him peace for the night. The next morning arrived quietly, as if the neighborhood was trying to make up for the chaos of the previous day. The air felt still, the kind of stillness that comes after a long storm. Inside the house, the father woke before the kids did. He walked through the hallway slowly, checking their rooms like he always did, just to make sure they were resting peacefully. Both children were asleep, their faces calm again, and that alone made him feel more at ease. He went to the kitchen and started preparing breakfast. The simple routine helped steady his thoughts. He chopped fruit, toasted bread, and tried to focus on normal things. Every now and then, the memories of yesterday crossed his mind again: the police cars outside, the worried faces of his children, and the neighbor standing there, so sure she had done the right thing. He let out a quiet breath and kept working, reminding himself that the worst part was already behind them. When the kids finally woke up and came into the kitchen, he greeted them with a warm smile. The boy rubbed his eyes and asked if the police were coming again. The father knelt down and told him no, that everything was okay, and nothing like that was going to happen today. The girl didn't say anything at first, but she walked over and hugged him from behind, resting her forehead against his back. He reached back and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. They sat for breakfast, and he made sure to keep the conversation light. He asked about their plans for the weekend, what they wanted to do, what games they wanted to play. Slowly, their faces brightened, and the nervous energy that had filled the house the day before began to fade. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up too. People watered plants, swept porches, walked dogs, and acted like everything was back to normal. But there was a different kind of silence in the air, one that hinted that everyone knew what had happened. They just weren't talking about it openly. Not yet. A little later, while the father cleaned up the kitchen and the kids settled into their morning routines, a soft knock came at the front door. He paused for a moment, took a breath, and walked over to answer it. Standing there was the neighbor. She wasn't standing tall like she had the day before. Her shoulders were lowered, her head slightly bowed, and her hands were clasped in front of her as if she wasn't sure what to do with them. She looked nervous, almost as if she expected the door to slam shut in her face. The father didn't look angry or cold. He simply waited, giving her the space to speak. After a small hesitation, she began talking, though her voice came out softer and less confident than usual. She said she wanted to apologize. She admitted she had made a mistake, a big one. She explained that she had panicked because she misunderstood the noise and convinced herself something terrible was happening. She talked about her background, saying she had moved from a place where she had seen things go wrong before, where she had heard real fights, real danger. She said she reacted based on fear and not reality, and she regretted not checking first or simply asking if everything was okay. Her voice shook a little and she looked genuinely ashamed. The father listened quietly. He didn't interrupt her or rush her. When she finished, she waited nervously for him to respond. He took a breath and told her he appreciated that she came forward on her own. He said he understood that people sometimes act out of fear, but he also explained that her decision had caused a lot of stress for his children. He reminded her that kids remember moments like that and that yesterday had scared them deeply. Her eyes softened, and she nodded slowly. She apologized again, this time even more sincerely. She said she hoped she hadn't ruined the possibility of a peaceful relationship as neighbors. She didn't expect instant forgiveness, but she wanted to at least take responsibility for what she had done. The father stood silent for a moment, thinking. He then told her that, while the situation had been difficult, he believed in giving people a chance to correct their mistakes. He didn't want tension in the neighborhood, and he didn't think holding anger would help anyone. He accepted her apology, but also reminded her gently to approach situations with more care in the future. She nodded gratefully, visibly relieved. Before she left, she offered to help in any way she could, though she didn't know exactly how. The father told her the best thing she could do was simply be mindful and not assume the worst next time. She thanked him again and walked away with a different posture, still embarrassed, but lighter. Once the door closed, the kids peeked out from their rooms. They asked if everything was all right. He told them that the neighbor apologized and that things were going to be peaceful again. That reassurance made them relax, especially the younger one, who smiled for the first time that morning. The rest of the day went smoothly. The father kept the kids busy with small activities around the house. They played board games, drew pictures, and watched a movie together. The atmosphere felt calm, far from the tension of the previous day. The kids laughed more, slowly shedding the last bits of worry they had been carrying. Later in the afternoon, the father stepped outside to take out the trash. He noticed a couple of neighbors nod in his direction, offering a silent acknowledgement of support. One of them waved politely, though it was clear that no one wanted to bring up the topic directly. People preferred to let it fade naturally instead of turning it into a neighborhood story. He appreciated that. The last thing he wanted was more attention on the situation. As sunset approached, the father sat on the porch steps with a cup of tea in his hands. The soft orange light spread across the houses, making everything look peaceful again. The kids were inside, laughing over something they saw on TV, and their voices drifted gently out of the open window. The neighbor eventually came outside too. She stood in her yard watering her plants quietly. For a moment, their eyes met. Instead of looking away, she gave him a small, humble nod. Not a forced smile, not an awkward wave, just a quiet gesture that said she truly meant her apology. He returned the nod, and that was enough. Later in the evening, he sat in the living room with the kids again. They talked about simple things: school, friends, weekend plans. The normal rhythm was returning. The house felt light again. The children were no longer looking over their shoulders or asking anxious questions as they prepared for bed. The girl spoke up. She said she was glad everything was okay now, and she hoped the neighbor understood how scared they had been. The father hugged her and said that people learn from mistakes, and sometimes those lessons come in uncomfortable ways. He reminded her that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does help everyone move forward. When the kids went to sleep that night, stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them. They were peaceful again, breathing softly, free from the fear the previous day had created. He closed their doors slowly, feeling grateful that things had settled. Before going to bed himself, he took one last look outside. The streets were still, the lights dim, the air gentle. The neighborhood seemed to have moved past the incident. No more whispers, no more curious stares. Just quiet. He took a deep breath and stepped back inside, feeling a sense of closure. In the end, the day before became a quiet lesson for everyone involved. A reminder that assumptions can create chaos where none exists. That people's fears sometimes speak louder than truth, and that understanding can help repair things that go wrong. The father didn't hold on to anger. The neighbor didn't hide behind excuses. And the children learned that calmness can overcome confusion. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a real one shaped by honesty, humility, and the simple choice to make peace instead of holding on to resentment. And as the night settled over the quiet street, the family finally felt safe again, knowing that tomorrow would begin without fear and without misunderstandings, just the peace they had always wanted in their home. The next day began with a kind of quiet that felt different from the one before. It wasn't heavy, and it wasn't tense. It was simply calm. The kind of calm that comes when life tries to settle back into place after being shaken. The father woke up early again, not because anything troubled him during the night, but because his mind was still trying to adjust to the sudden shift from chaos to peace. He walked through the hallway and peeked into the kids' rooms, just like he always did. They were still sleeping, the soft morning light falling gently across their faces. He smiled to himself, thankful that they finally looked truly relaxed. The worry that had settled in their expressions the day of the incident was fading more each hour. He headed to the kitchen and began making breakfast. Enjoying the steady rhythm of simple tasks, he cracked eggs, warmed up the pan, and let the morning sounds fill the house. The quiet clatter of dishes and the faint hum of the refrigerator felt like signs that things were returning to normal. But even as he cooked, his mind wandered back to everything that had happened. He wasn't upset anymore. He wasn't replaying the worst parts or the fear in his children's eyes. Instead, he thought about how quickly misunderstandings could take shape and how easily emotions could twist a situation into something it wasn't. The whole neighborhood seemed to have learned something, and so had he. A little while later, the kids woke up and came into the kitchen. The younger one waved sleepily, dragging his blanket behind him, while the older one sat down at the table and rested her chin on her hand. They looked peaceful, no longer bracing for something unexpected. They ate breakfast together with light conversation. The boy talked about a cartoon he had watched the night before, while the girl mentioned wanting to try baking cookies later. The father listened with a warm smile, grateful for their growing comfort. After breakfast, the kids went to the living room to play, and the father stepped outside for a moment to take in the morning air. The street looked calm. A few neighbors were out tending to their gardens or heading to work. One of them gave him a polite wave, and he returned it. He wasn't expecting what happened next. The neighbor from the day before, the one who had called the police, stepped out of her house as well. She wasn't looking around nervously like before. Instead, she held a small box in her hands, something wrapped neatly with care. She walked slowly toward his house, pausing every few steps, as if she was still unsure whether she should keep going. When she finally reached his gate, she cleared her throat gently. The father looked at her with calm curiosity. She began speaking in a quieter, steadier voice than she had used the previous day. She explained that she had spent most of the night thinking about her behavior, about the fear she caused the children, and about the burden she placed on the father without any real reason. She said she knew she had apologized already, but she felt it wasn't enough. She had acted on fear, but she understood that fear alone wasn't an excuse.